And you can do 2 minutes on B.
That's right. Okay, so I'll point out that once again you're falling behind. You're just about a year behind on these cases. You have officer involved shooting number 08416. There's 1 captain, 1 sergeant, and 3 police officers involved. That's 5 people involved. Week after week we come here and we look at these cases that you look at and you rubber stamp the chiefs. Occasionally you might find something out of policy. Nothing ever happens. My questions are this: if you have, like, I think there's 11 officers involved in these 2 incidents, an officer involved shooting and a beating that resulted in an injury to someone from law enforcement violation of Government Code 454957. If that's 11, 12 officers a week, over the course of 50 weeks, you're talking about more than 500 officers, unless these people are doing it repeat offenders, serial shooters or killers. So I'm wondering how many of these people have been involved in previous shootings, or are these every week 6 or 7 or 10 officers, new different officers involved in another shooting? I think that it's irresponsible of you to let this go forward on and on in the way that you do. So I'm wondering what happened to Mr. Pena. Was he actually killed in the shooting, or was he only wounded? And what you're going to do about it. I think that you have a responsibility to be much more transparent and to deal with this problem as a significant, serious social problem, and that your responsibility and oversight of this department, which has been the most murderous department in the country. I think 3 years out of 4, they lost their title to the sheriff's department 1 year, I think. So I think that's a really serious problem. In the second case, if I'm moving on, it's about 2 minutes.
Let's start the clock again for the second case. 2 minutes for the second case, and then 2 minutes for the last portion. Go ahead.
All right, so 5A2, you have, again, a beating incident, I assume is what it is. And again, as I say, there's a sergeant, a police officer, and then 1 police officer, 3, 4 police officers, 2, 1 police officer, 1. So that's another 7 officers involved in the beating of 1 man. I think that represents a kind of bully mentality we've seen illustrated here again and again. You try to get one person who's trying to leave the room and get his possessions, as you did with Mr. Hamid Khan. You had about 7 officers surrounding him. I think that represents the kind of overkill mentality that this department is trained in carrying out. And I think that's a fundamental aspect of your training, that you think somehow it de-escalates, when in fact it's evident to everybody that what that's doing is escalating the situation and creating a tendency or propensity for violence, which would be the violence of the police department. So I think that, again, you're derelict in your duty of oversight on these cases. I don't know if you're going to represent this one as well as you've done most of them, but I think that although when you have a investment offer, they say, well, the previous practice is no guarantee of future results. I think your practice pretty clearly guarantees the results of this one. Will also be a rubber stamp, since I've almost never seen anybody deviate from the general policy of the board in any vote you've ever taken. Most of the time it's unanimous, and I suspect that you'll just back up the LAPD in this one as well. So my last comment is on the question of the public employment, item 5B, public employee appointment, discussion relative to the appointment of an inspector general. And I think that this is a vital position. I think that, we've seen a few examples of inspectors general at other departments. For example, there was an inspector general at the CIA who was willing to go out and actually verify some of the findings that were brought out by independent journalists like Gary Webb about the involvement of the CIA in drug dealing and in the movement of crack cocaine into the city of Los Angeles under the auspices of the Contras and operatives who were relating to the CIA. So I think that having an independent inspector general for the Los Angeles Police Department that could seriously investigate the criminality of that department and the pattern and practice of abuse of people's rights that exist, no matter what their so-called adopted policies are, is really critical. I urge you, if you're discussing that in executive session, that you take that responsibility very, very seriously, and you look for somebody who is not beholden to the police department, but and will recognize that your usual covers of so-called constitutional policing are not an effective barrier against what the police department does, because the U.S. Constitution has enforced the system of white supremacy going back to its founding, when it declared that African slaves were to be considered 3/5 of a person for the purposes of augmenting the representation of the white slave owners. And I think that you have a fundamental responsibility to appoint an inspector general who will prevent the LAPD from carrying out the enforcement of white supremacy, colonialism, and the protection of private profiteers and exploiters.
Thank you, sir.
We have